Welcome to the Spiral of the Rose podcast with our friends Jess, Kelly and Bree.
Hi, and welcome to the Spiral of the Rose podcast. Today we are introducing the topic of discernment. And this will be a 3-part series because we just had so much to talk about with this. We couldn't just leave it to one episode. So in the first part of this series, we will be discussing feeling empowered versus disempowered in your spiritual practices and beliefs, and leaning in to choose what feels best for you when it comes to your own beliefs and practices, and also becoming the investigator in your own spiritual journey and embodying that childlike curiosity to discover what works and feels best for you and leaving the rest at the door. So in this podcast, it's all about exploring the path that resonates most with you, right? So being very intentional and using your intuition to guide you always above all else. So we thought it would be appropriate to talk a little bit about why discernment is so important. And we obviously thought it was so important we had 3 episodes full. So here is the first episode. Let's jump in. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Spiral of the Rose podcast. Today, we're coming to you with a topic around spiritual discernment and how to sort of discern between empowering versus disempowering content, energies, people, and other things that you come across as you are on your spiritual journey. So both Bree and I recently have come across a ton of stuff as we are navigating our own lives where we are having to check in with our intuition frequently just to see whether this is for us or not. So that's how this topic sort of came up and arose, and it seemed very relevant to share it with everybody because it just seems so prevalent out there right now. So we're going to dive into this and tell you a little bit more about how we can step into our own discernment around these things and the practices that each of us do on a daily basis, as well as some tips for you that you can walk away with.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's really important, especially it feels like we're in this spiritual awakening revolution, right? Like it's like everybody is all of a sudden waking up. And what happens with that is you get a lot of up and down. You get a lot of negative and positive, right? You get a lot of both worlds. And especially for anyone newer stepping into all of this kind of spiritual awakening stuff, what happens is it gets hard to tell what's actually helpful for you, what's actually supportive of your energy, what's in alignment and what's not, right? And hopefully we can shed some light on that in this episode.
Amazing. I love that. So being me and the person who loves to research, I just Googled what is the meaning of discernment. So discernment, per Merriam-Webster, is an act of perceiving or discerning something, which is not incredibly helpful.
That is a terrible answer.
Right?
That's using the word in the description. Come on, Google.
Exactly. Yeah. So thank you so much for that one. Not helpful. Next one, the quality of being able to grasp and comprehend what is obscure, a skill in discerning. Okay, so this was useless, right? So
it's knowing whether something is right or wrong. That's what discernment is.
So, but that's the beautiful, example in this. You can't just Google and go spiritual practices, what's right and what's wrong. Google's going to come up with a
No.
whole bunch of stuff, right? It's going to come up with stuff that's as obscure as that definition, right? That you end up like walking away with more questions than when you began.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's like what is right? And the thing I really love that you said was for you. That is the key piece in all of this, is discerning what is best for you.
Yeah.
Because normally when you step into a new practice or a new learning, and if you think about the typical route, you know, like high school, college, learning, you have to learn something in a specific way. It's not open to debate or like speculation, like 1 + 1 is 2. 2 + 2 is 4, right? It's like, this is the right answer. This is the incorrect answer. But with spirituality, it's really finding what is best and right for like you as a person. What resonates with you, your belief system, where you are, what you're here to experience, the way in which you perceive things. So really starting with discernment by giving yourself that permission to find what's best for you and what's right for you personally, even if it isn't somebody else's truth and they're like, no, it's definitely not that. Maybe it's not for them, and that's okay. And we get to be different. And that's something that I really, really love about our group. When we chat, we see things so differently, like so completely differently, but we're able to discern and say what's right for me, and simultaneously like holding that space to go, this is right for me in the way that I like to do it, but you like to do it in a different way, and that's perfect too. So giving
Yes,
yourself
not
that
judging each
permission.
other's choice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no judgment whatsoever. And then giving other people permission to experience it differently. And going with this, you know, the whole empowering, disempowering, a lot of times people, it's their truth. And they could say, this particular practice, this is the way to do whatever, X, Y, and Z. This is the way to clear your energy. This is how it's done. And they believe so deeply in it, which is beautiful, right? They have that connection and it works for them.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it's going to work for you. And it doesn't mean that's what feels best for you. And it doesn't mean that it's right or wrong. So stepping out of that, like right and wrong, that's what's best for that person.
Yes.
And they were able to discern and find that worked for them and that was their truth. And then you get to discern, is this for me or isn't this for me? And then a second part to that is, you know, there might be some stuff you follow and you're like, yes, 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 yes. And suddenly you hit a no, like really trusting in yourself and going, that's okay. This piece doesn't resonate with me.
Yeah.
And you could look at that differently rather than going, well, everything else this person is saying, like I followed and I believe. So maybe it's me. Maybe I'm not seeing it or I don't understand it. And that's not it. We're all here to experience it so uniquely and differently. So yeah, again, the biggest thing I'd say is that permission to have what's right and discern what's right for you personally.
Yeah. And there was a couple of things you said in there that I wanted to like draw attention to. One is you were talking about finding what resonates with you. And for some of our listeners, you never know, right? They might not even really understand the word resonates. It might be like, what does that really mean? And really, what stood out to me there is that what resonates for you is what feels right. Okay. So what feels right though, how do you figure that out? You use your discernment. So I just thought it was like so interesting that it's like, what resonates for you? Well, you got to discern that, right? Like it literally is the same thing again. And then, oh, that was the other thing. So you were talking about how math, like you were using math as an example of a very concrete, like this is the facts, this is what it is. It's not up for debate, right? And I wanted to just share a funny story of one time Cadence, my oldest, challenged me with that, like was using that as an example. Well, can I just like, what if math doesn't resonate, basically, right? Like she was just like it was we were talking
It
about all the
doesn't
different
resonate with
spiritual
me either.
practices. No, I know, right? I was like, well, okay, gotta be mom here. No, it was, we were talking about different spiritual practices, she and I, and because I've never that was one thing that I was absolutely adamant when I had kids that I was not going to pass on, was a forced belief system, because I was raised in a forced belief system where it was like, this is the truth, you have to believe this, end of story, like the end, right? And so I won't do that to my kids. But I also struggle with, I want to expose them to as many different options as possible so that they're making an informed decision when they do decide what they believe. So we have these conversations every once in a while. And that time we were talking about it, and I was saying, like, I personally believe that what you believe is the truth. And so everybody's truth is different. And what you believe and what's true for you simply is your truth, and it is true for you. And it can also change, like you were saying. It can, like, all of a sudden it can become a no, and you can be like, oh, something shifted. And that might be because you've reached a different level of understanding in something. That may be because you had an experience in life that opened your eyes to a new way of thinking about something. It could be anything. But trusting ourselves to know, like, no, I just don't believe in that. And then of course she was like, okay, so can I just not believe in math? And I was like, okay,
I love her.
well,
I love her. Yes.
I know. I was like, okay, couple of things. There's two things I have to say to this. One is, you still have to do your math homework because you have to turn it in at school. It's the law. Like, we do live in the 3D world. So therefore I have to send you to school, and that's part of school, like the end. But I was like, there is also the part where some people actually don't believe in the math system that we have. Like, they think that it's flawed, or they think that there's it's a construct, right, that doesn't actually explain fully the truth. So I was like, it's a really good question, right? Like, do I have to believe in math? Well, not really, but you're probably going to have a hard time navigating day-to-day life with other people who follow that construct, right? So it's a good idea to have a foundation and an understanding of it, and then you can choose what you want to believe as you grow up, but at least you'll understand what other people are talking about, right?
I had to I had to mute myself for a minute. I was laughing so hard for that. I have to say, good for her. Like, good for her. And that's what we need. People
Yeah.
questioning and people challenging and going, but do I really? Like, do I really? Like, I don't know. This doesn't feel that great for me. Like, what are the options here, right?
And really, like, as a mom, that was a tough one for me, like, where I had to be like, okay, outside the box here, does she have to believe in math? And that seems like such a, like, for me, this is my biggest stretch, my biggest growth thing, right? Where I have to be like, what is actually within the realms of possibility? And it's anything. And if I say that and I tell her that as a fundamental truth, that anything is possible, then I have to take a question like, can I just not believe in math seriously?
Mm-hmm.
I have to legitimately respond to that. I can't just laugh her off or blow it off and be like, that's a stupid question. It's not a stupid question. It's, I fucking hate math. So can we just choose not to believe in it? Maybe. Right? Like, I really had to stop and be like, okay, how do I be mom, but also be open-minded, right? Because I have to keep her responsible, but at the same time, I'm like, there's a limit on that. Like, yeah, we can question some of these things that nobody ever questions,
Yeah.
right? And then making that okay. Yeah. So that was stretchy, but it was also, I just thought it was such a funny example of, because you particularly were like talking about math and it just being a fact and like, whatever. And it's like, well, but is it though?
And that's also such a, yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say that kind of reminds me. So this is totally a way different subject than math, but I was her same age when I came to this decision that I went to my parents like at 13 and said, do I have to believe in going to confession at Catholic church? Like, can I just not go? And they were like, no, you don't have to believe in that. You can just not go. So they weren't like super strict Catholics. So they let you make your own decision. But it just kind of reminded me of that, because that's like, to me, like that age, you start thinking like, I can do, I can follow what feels good to me. And if someone says, sure, you can follow what feels good to you and empowers you to do what feels good to you, then that really shapes the rest of your young teenagehood, your young adulthood, going into adulthood, that really is a huge influence. But if someone says, no, you have to do this, even if it doesn't feel good to you, that is disempowering right there. And that shapes
Yes.
the rest of, your young adult years. So it's just
Well,
like,
and it
Mhm.
can, or it doesn't have to, right? And I love that your parents were more open like that, and were very like, no, if you don't want that, if that doesn't feel right for you, that you could step away from that. For me, I was 15 when I moved out the first time, because there was no stepping away from it, because I didn't believe, and I didn't have that space to step away, right? So I love that you had that. And I think, like, not to be like, oh, some people just aren't that lucky. That's not my point. But it's just like, what we want to bring to the world is that awareness, is that open-mindedness. So I love that. I love that you got raised with that. I love that. And for me, I was very like, screw you, I'm still not going to do it, because that's my personality, right? But there are a lot of people who aren't as empowered, who are disempowered as they're being raised, right? And I love, like, that's my biggest reason for wanting to leave it open for my kids, and not tell them like, hey, this is the one thing I believe. In fact, they have watched my beliefs transform to something completely different over the last couple of years, right? So and then still, even more recently, I had a conversation with Cadence where I asked her, do you believe in God? And she answered yes. So even knowing that I'm more of like the source energy and universal energy and divine, really, whatever, versus like God, she still had the confidence and safety with me to be like, no, I believe in God. Like, that's my thing that I believe in. And I think that's amazing, right? I was like, okay, cool. And I can work with that. As soon as I know what you believe, then I can work with it. Right. So it was just like, I mean, a little bit of like a proud mama moment, but also like, that is the shift, right? That's the shift that we want to bring for everybody, because that freedom to find what really aligns with you is so much more supportive to living, like you said, living that life that feels amazing to you, right? Versus feeling like you're locked up and shackled to a certain belief system. And I think really that's the biggest thing with spirituality, right? Is there's, depending on how you come across it, on how you, like, what your path is that you follow, you might start out with a mentor who's very much like, this is the only way, versus, well, what do you think? Like, maybe do a little bit of research and find what's right for you. What's in your ancestral line? What's your, and I was really blessed that I had someone who was like, we're looking at all the options here, people, and you pick what works for you, right? Versus, like, that was so empowering for me after being raised in that disempowering mindset. So it was like, I got really lucky, but I know not everyone is. And it's actually a little bit scary. Like, some of the things that we were coming across, Kelly, you and I, when we were, like, all of this stuff was coming up, there's a lot of scary stuff in there where, energies can be really nasty if we're not being discerning, and if we're not being careful in our spiritual practices, right? And learnings.
So yeah, I want to go back real quick to you mentioning God. And it's so interesting for me because I see you smiling. For me, it is God. For me, it is universe. For me, it is source. The way I was brought up and the meaning of God and the persona of God to me is this loving entity that is synonymous with universe. The way in which I was taught and learned all of it, it's all of it. And it's very interesting whenever I start a reading with someone, the first thing I ask them is, what is this to you? And I say, what feels best? And sometimes people need a little bit of guidance, which is also very interesting because sometimes people don't really know what to call it. And to just say it doesn't actually matter, I would just like to use the verbiage that feels good in your body so that as we're going over this information, that's not a point that you have to think about. It shouldn't even be a thing. It's like this, whatever it is for you, and then get the rest of the information. So again, being discerning in what is that to you? And it's okay. Like whoever, whatever that is, that energy.
And with
And
that, like awareness for people that they can, if they're listening to someone speak that says the word God and God isn't what resonates, these words are really and truly interchangeable. They are, and some people are like really against that, but in all reality, if you listen to something somebody's saying and they say universe and you think God, and that helps you to understand the message better, that's all that matters. Right. So like the verbiage doesn't actually matter, but I also love that you take into consideration when you're on a call with a client or whatever, that you are using the one that's going to resonate for them so that it just feels amazing for them. I think that that's beautiful. And I have to say, like, I've learned a lot of my openness to it being any of them from you, because the fact that somebody could think like, oh, it could be just universe, it could be source, and it could be God. I was like, what? Like, I can't even, it took me a while to like even wrap my head around that. So yeah, I think that's beautiful.
And for anybody listening, if it's very distinctly God for you, amazing. Like if that's what feels good, fantastic. Or if it's very distinctly like universe or source or like yellow sparkle, whatever the thing is, right? Like whatever feels best for you.
Yeah.
Of course I look up and I'm like, what do I see? Sparkles. um Whatever, there is no right or wrong. It's what feels best for you. And the other thing too is it gets to change. If you
Yes.
start out your journey and you start out with yellow sparkle and you start to learn more and you go, you know what, yellow sparkle's just not really fully encompassing everything. I prefer I don't know, give me a word. What do we got here? Cheetah rock over here. Or beads, if this is the thing that feels best. I'm purposefully not using God and universe because I don't want to step on those and say one into the other. However, this transforms and whatever that is for you is perfect, and it gets to change. It's not, I have this belief and it's this no matter what. This is it fully. I feel like honestly, part of spirituality is that open-mindedness, being open to what else is there? What else can I learn? And how can I open my heart even bigger and love more people, love more aspects, bringing more of that in?
I love that.
So, yeah. So whatever that is for you, just know that it is perfect. It is perfect and it gets to change. The other thing I really wanted to touch on, I love how embodied children are. I just love how they are at this place and they're just like, they question everything. And I see it in my own children. But mommy, why? But why? But what if it was like this? But what this and this and this and questioning? And you get to be that investigator in this journey. You get to ask those questions because a lot of times there's this feeling of superiority of like, oh, they have the wisdom, they have the knowledge, they know. But that's not what spirituality is. Nobody is better than anybody else. We're all on different journeys. And if you have questions, ask them. And if the person can't answer them, hopefully they're the type of person who says, let me go and find out. And that's
or
how
points you to someone who knows the answer or whatever, right?
And that's what can help you in the discernment is asking those questions. So really bringing back that childlike energy within you that you get to ask as you're on this journey. And there is no stupid question. We have had the best discussions from questions that are like, that seem very simple, that seem very trivial, but that's what sparks the discussion where like huge breakthroughs are made.
Yep.
It's so funny. So I actually just read a kid's book with Emma last night that said God in it. And she asked, why does it just say God? It doesn't say other people's beliefs. And I'm like, that's a good question. And so then we came up with a solution. We were like, when we write our own kids' books, whenever that is, because I know that's coming at some point, we're going to put every belief, right? We're going to put it's God, universe, spirit, goddess, everything and nothing all at once. We're going to put everything in there because we just want everybody to feel included in this.
I love that.
And that came from that question, right?
Yes, that came from her question. Yeah.
From questioning and saying, but why is it done this way, right? Like, why isn't it fully inclusive? I love that.
And that's how you practice discernment, is by asking questions. If you don't ask questions, then you're not actually being discerning, right? You're not actually using your discernment. So
Right.
That's super important. And I love that as a lead in to actually talking about how, like, what this can look like when it comes to discovering new spiritual practices, when it comes to learning new things online, following different, mentors or leaders that are doing things a certain way. Like, how do we want to what do we want to be looking out for? What are key things to keep an eye on? What are what are the most important things for people to pay attention to as they go about following their spiritual path or learning, being on their spiritual journey? Aside from, and I love it as a starting point, having that childlike, like, openness to question.
In our next episode, we are going to get deeper into specifically talking about how you can be discerning in your everyday practices and some examples of what that looks like. We're going to be getting deeper into helping you navigate your own journey, and we know life gets busy and sometimes it's hard to slow down and really be discerning on what feels empowering versus disempowering to you in your journey. So the second part of this series on discernment will be coming out on the podcast next. Look out for that episode, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to like it and subscribe. And if you really loved it, we would love a 5-star review, which helps us reach more people with our message. Comment your thoughts on the episode below, or if you have any questions you'd like us to answer in a future episode. Talk to you next time.
But how do we ask those questions? What does that look like? Some examples. And Kelli, like, maybe if you want to start